Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Millennials Are Killing Capitalism. Today is part one of a two-part collaboration with Saturdays with Renee Johnston. I have fixed in the show description the misspelling of her name, and I'm sorry, Renee. Thanks, everybody, for showing up. Of course, take a moment, like the video, subscribe to the channel if you have not already. We recently reached 8,000 subscribers. So, cool milestone. Follow us on socials, support us on Patreon, support Black Liberation Media on Patreon as well. I'm not gonna do lengthy introductions for our guests because I think people know, but I did put their bios in the show description for everybody. We've got Dr. Jared Ball from I Mix What I Like, Renee Johnston, uh, from Saturdays with Renee, and a bunch of political organizing that you can check out in the show description, and Geechee, also a bunch of political organizing. Also, people will be familiar with him from Earn Your Liberation. Um, I, I don't know the exact status of that at this point. And from other shows on Black Power Media and so on. So anyways, I'm really excited to welcome all of these folks to the show. I'm a big fan of all the work that all of you do. Watch a lot of it as much as I can find time for. And it's great to be in conversation with you all.
No, definitely likewise. And definitely want to say publicly, first of all, thank you for having me and us. And big shout out to the platform. I think what you do here is fantastic. Standard setting. So thank you.
Ditto. And I'm excited to be here. This is like whenever I get on a live to watch, I'll be like, yes, I made the live. So
yeah, and I definitely veggie back, oyster mushrooms off of what they said. I love the show. I actually send it out at least once a week to different people. A lot of the interviews you have are very insightful, and so we appreciate you, bro.
So now you got to push for 10K. Now you get to get to the
10K. Yeah, no, for sure.
There you go.
And likewise, I mean, I really do appreciate all of the work that all of you do and do often also share it, reference it, so on. I mean, even like Renee, a lot of times, I mean, so we had this back and forth about preparation in the email beforehand. And, I always have questions that I prepare and stuff like that. But Renee sent like a Google Doc with like 40 links too. So it's like there's different ways of preparing, and the way that Renee prepares and you all prepare in different ways for your shows, I appreciate and get a lot out of. So
I know
anyway.
poor Jared got introduced to the run sheet. I do this. So I'm gonna start calling you J-Dub because I got to keep you two separate in my brain, and that's what I call you when I talk to my mother. I call you J-Dub so that she knows which Jared I'm talking about. And so poor J-Dub got introduced to the run sheet at midnight because of course I was up in the middle of the night pulling references and stuff. But this is poor Jared's, like, this is his life. He wakes up on a Saturday and there's like 80 links. Sorry.
No, it's all
no,
good.
But it's a testimony to the preparedness. And I told you privately that I'm not doing a live immediately after watching yours anymore, because not only did and yesterday was in particular, but there's a level of political standards you've been really hitting lately that's really important, that Absolutely. I don't think that I have, and then there's a level of preparedness that I think you hit as an appropriate standard too. So yeah, shout out to all of it. Yeah.
One thing I would say in response to that is that one of the things I appreciate about you, Jared, and I know we'll wrap up the love fest after this, but
let's move on.
Is just that also you do debate people. Like, you do actually, when you disagree with something that somebody's putting forward as an idea or whatever, you're like, I don't agree with that, and this is why, and what do you think about this? And our own platform, I think, because of the way that we've set it up, both Josh and I, we've gotten a little bit more comfortable disagreeing with people on certain things, but like we do kind of have this way of just sort of like setting up the question and then letting people present their views, which sometimes we agree with and sometimes we don't. And that allows, there's a certain amount of liberalism in that way of approaching things as well, of, like, anyway, so let's move into the discussion. I mean, this is part of, so when Renee and I have been kind of going back and forth for a little while about doing some kind of collaboration around this. And Renee brought forward the idea of doing something on the elections, which I did want. I mean, initially I was like kind of interested in doing something on with you all around the kind of Daruba's point around the United Front approach to elections, which is interesting to me. But so I think Renee approach was something around elections and kind of media propaganda and stuff like that, which I'm sure that we will get to today and tomorrow in our discussion. But even with that, like, one of the things that I kind of want to start with, because it is something that I struggle with, is, and it's why we don't talk about elections a whole lot and haven't had a lot of politicians, even third party politicians on the show over the years. Actually, I've never had one. Is like, even the baseline of sort of electoral organizing as kind of the thing that people should be engaged in, and whether that is the right way, like whether we actually want to direct people's energy into that arena, even in a um, anti Democratic Party way. Which, so so I kind of want to start with this question just about, first, the importance, which I do fully agree with you all on breaking with the Democratic Party, right? Because I think, DSA has a sort of inside outside strategy, right? Of like, okay, we're going to build a movement outside, but we're also going to run politicians within, progressive ones. And, over time, I don't know exactly how they vision that as a long-term strategy, but that's there, right? So there are other people who make that kind of argument of like, we run progressives within this thing, which we know is ultimately not a good entity, but we're gonna, on a local level, run these candidates. And then there could be another argument, I think, that some folks have of, look, we're just gonna do our own community organizing and and so on. We're not really gonna tell people like what to do, uh, and but it'll probably be a kind of lesser evil approach when people come to voting, right? But we're just kind of do our community organizing. And so I'm interested at a starting point of, for all of you, like, what is the importance, or do you think, like, first, I guess, was one point, do you think we need to break with the Democratic Party? I mean, I think all of us probably already have, but and then why is that important in your view? So any of you could start.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll go. So yeah, I mean, definitely breaking with the Democratic Party is the only idea, the only logical idea. And so even when I think about the DSA, right, they sometimes can say some fly shit, but they acquiesce still to the exploitation and oppression that the Democrats promote. And I would even urge people to take a better look at the Mississippi Democratic Freedom group and how they move, because I feel like even now, especially in this time, Mama Fannie Lou is being misquoted and misused. And so I think the DSA don't have like a long game in the long game, or the ground game that the left needs to engage in, right? And so building a third party, I know we talked about the after party and these other things, but building a third party around what's already on the ground. So, we talked about this on one of the shows, how I was at the Invest Fest, and people have a natural inclination, especially in this environment, to socialism. They just can't, I guess, go to that thing, or they just can't be committed to those type of policies and that groundwork that it takes to kind of push people into more radical ideas. And so, yeah, I think the break from the Democratic Party is natural, and there's really no way to, inside the Democratic Party, get the material conditions that we want. And if anybody thinks that's the shortcut to the material conditions that we want to see, they're not serious.
Yeah, Renee, you wanted to? I don't know.
No, you can go ahead first.
I mean, yeah, break with the Democratic Party is, I think, a bare minimum that has to happen. And I have ever since I voted for Bill Clinton in 1992, which is the last time I voted for a Democrat. I've just thought the only real purpose for engaging electoral politics at all is because that's just where most people are and where most people start when you engage a discussion of anything political. So I've always just wanted to check off these certain boxes. So you said, join the military. Fine, I did that. You said, get degrees. Fine, I did that. You said vote in every election. Fine, I'll do that. You said get the house with the fence and the 2 kids and the dog I did that too. So, and we're still not free. It's still messed up. So, so now what? Now can we do? That has always been my attitude. So if I vote, if I run for office, when do we get to have a conversation about the kind of politics I really wanted to talk about and move towards? And I'm increasingly, I think I'm almost at the point where I don't honestly want to talk about it at all anymore. I just have a hard time finding, unless we're already in a space like these, I have a hard time finding ways to get to those without being forced to start there. So when it comes to organizing, it's been somewhat similar because I've also found that even in spaces that claim to be wildly left, when it comes to an election, people either openly or quietly end up going and voting in these same ways. So I've just wanted to advocate finding, look, if you're going to do some vote anyway, let's start applying it in a more militant way, which is at least with so-called third parties or some independent. But ultimately, and I know we'll end up getting to this at some point over the next 2 days, or as much as a lot over the next 2 days, is that I really think we as much of the focus needs to be on something else, and we have to find ways of collectively moving to interrupt. Because as others have said, it's been captured. This process has largely been captured. So yeah, I'll stop there. But yeah.
It's real quick. There's something that you said. When I was in Eastern Kentucky, I was in Appalachia, and I remember being a part. I used to work with an Apple Shot. It's a grassroots radio station there, and doing a little journalism. And we was interviewing Bill Clinton right after he was on his campaign run with Hillary Clinton, and he made, he obviously made the little blunder that they was under a sniper attack or whatever. And Sinbad was like, no, we weren't. Like, the little girl gave me a hug when I got off the plane. But anyway, like once Bill Clinton, I think I asked the question. There was somebody who asked the question about burning coal. And this is when the clean coal rhetoric was around, right? And Bill Clinton said, you know why we can't stop burning coal? And they was like, why? They said, because China is burning coal at this rate per second. And everybody started clapping. I was like, wait, we in a race? Race to burn the damn coal? So like, I was, at that point, especially in college, I was like really disillusioned with the Democratic Party. And so that right there, I was like, I don't know what the hell this guy talking about, but yeah.
Geechee and his stories. I can't.
The Black Where's Waldo, I'm telling you, that like been everywhere and everything. African Forrest Gump.
Get in the rooms, chill out.
But I think for me, I cannot live in the bubble, right? Like this nonsensical idea that there is some version of capitalism and imperialism and colonialism and oppression that's like somewhat better, right? Like, and that's all, when all is said and done, that is all the Democratic Party has to offer you, is that our version of oppression, colonialism, capitalism, and imperialism is a little bit better than what you're going to get with the Republican Party. And at some point, people have to be willing to like really address this, right? And really just say, like, there is no version of genocide that is better than another version of genocide. There is no version of oppression that's better than this version of oppression. And as I've gone into this really looking at, I think one of this whole thing that I've been doing with looking at Kamala Harris's advisors, it has been so eye-opening to me to understand that they are all coming from the same cesspool of like it's just the same faces and people rotating in and out of government, into big business, into venture capitalism, into law firms, back into government. Like it's all the same rotation of people. They're all working together. They're all hanging out. They're all drinking together. They're all doing whatever they do off camera together. And it's all for the however many millions of people who are already rich and don't really need anything because they've they've got so much money and wealth accumulated that there's nothing that's really going to bother them. So for me, a large part of my participation in political organizing is more because if we're ever able to actually break the system that exists as it is right now, if you're not already organized in order to do something different, then how do you proceed, right? You can't, there has to be something in the works that can kind of fill in that space. Because if you leave the void, if we're ever really able to break it, and who knows if that's actually going to happen in my lifetime or not, but if it's ever able to break, you have to have something prepared in order to move forward. So for me, that's with the whole organizing in, as part of the Green Party in New Jersey, that's my purpose, is okay, if we're able to actually break break the gap and push someone in, then we have to be prepared to do the work that's not being done now. And if you're not already working behind the scenes now to prepare for that, then how can you do it? It's not possible.
I appreciate that. I hear that. One quick thing I wanted to show, I think you made me think of it, Renee, when you're talking about the revolving door. So CARE put this out for folks who know CARE. They're like a very mainstream Muslim. It's the Council of American Islamic Relations, right? So it's a very kind of mainstream, Muslim civil rights and advocacy organization. But they have called on Biden to fire what they refer to as a shadow president, Brett McGurk, and other notoriously Orientalist and consistently wrong foreign policy advisors who have undermined I mean, first of all, I don't agree with any of this framing. I don't think Biden is being undermined in any way, or that he has some fun kind of so I'm not but the more the point is that this guy, right? He's a Bush administration veteran. They call him a wannabe Lawrence of Arabia, who is obsessed with entrenching Arab dictatorships and sidelining the Palestinian cause in the Middle East, all for the benefit of the Israeli government, whose war crimes he privately justifies. Right. So the point was just about the kind of revolving door. I mean, and this is one of the things in this moment that I find so, to speak a little bit to the Kamala Harris campaign. It's so wild to watch Dick Cheney, like all of the very worst people in the history of the world, line up behind her and say, vote for this person. Right. Which, I mean, yeah, I mean, it's really nuts, and it shows to me something about Trump. And I'm certainly not here to say anything positive about Trump, but there's enough fear within even conservative elements of the ruling class about I don't know whether it's that they think he's too volatile, or they think that he um puts a bad face on empire, or what it is really, but that certainly they're very comfortable with what Kamala Harris's agenda and administration represents, in fact more comfortable than him. And I think that speaks volumes in this particular election about how rough the the Democratic ticket is this time around. It's always bad, but it's pretty unusual to see this many like stark neoconservative genocidaires like coming out and saying like, yeah, no, we need to stick with this horse right now. So
Well,
yeah.
people, I don't know to what extent people remember, but we were part of the massive leveled, multi-leveled, massive wave of propaganda that we got with Obama. One of it was we're going to reclaim the world that George Bush ruined, and now all of his people are co-signing basically Obama Part 2, which is really Clinton Part 4 or whatever this is. So it should be some sort of alert or flag being waved for people to say, oh, the people we were told were to save us from these other people are now being supported by these other people. And I know the easy response would be for them to just say that Trump is somehow worse, but then we would have to really parse that out. How is Trump materially worse than Bush 2, Reagan, Bush 1, before we even get to the comparisons that aren't that stark between the Democrats? So if it just doesn't make sense. That's the logic of it. Just doesn't make sense. But it's which is why I've thought as a tactic it might work on some level to say, look, I'm willing to engage this process that I don't believe in. I'm willing to engage it on some level in some ways. Are you ever going to be willing to adjust how you engage it? Or is it going to be a constant refrain every 4 years of we just have to do this once again? We just have to do this once again. And that's the part that I admit it was naive to. I think that there is no end to that. There's no breaking that cycle. No matter what people see, no matter who gets elected, no matter what genocides are in real time, live happening right now, the propaganda, the messaging, the horrifically bad pre-educational process already prepares people to have that message plugged right back in. Oh, I know it's happening right now, but I promise you it will get worse if this other guy gets in. And it just, so yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this is what you're getting at though, in terms of the difficulty of breaking with it, right? Is part of why, honestly, like we have never had a serious practice of engaging with third party politics on Mac, because I think that it's interesting. A couple people recently have said this phrase to me, Kalia Kuno and also Leo Vilches, who was on the episode we did recently on Abolish Rent, which is about tenant organizing. And both of them are very long time, people who've been organizing for decades. And they use this phrase, it is easier to act our way into different forms of thinking than it is to think our way into different forms of action. It's an interesting phrase. Like I try to Google it and try to figure out, like, is this a Marxist, like, it kind of has that, like, sort of, there's a sort of dialectical materialist argument you could make about that, right? Of like, okay, the practices that people are always already engaged in, will help to change the way that they think, rather than what we think is going to change those practices. But it's actually, as far as I can tell, kind of a self-help. It comes out of sort of a self-help and maybe even Alcoholics Anonymous also background as a term, which doesn't mean, again, that it's wrong, right? It's just it was just interesting to me that seems to be, as far as I could tell, one of the main origins of the phrase. But I think that there is, like, voting for the Democratic Party is an action that people are taking. And I think it is hard, especially with all of the ideological, the propaganda. You think about the Breakfast Club episode with the Green Party, which I thought they did an excellent job in, trying to hold the line on a lot of their stances. That the people have all these just prepared sort of backlash mechanisms to defend it, to argue for it, to that we could talk about the Angela Davis quote recently again about it'll be easier to organize under the Democratic Party, which I think is totally false. And maybe we could talk about that a little bit later.
You mean
Um,
under the oh, I'm
oh,
sorry. If Kamala wins, it's easier to organize, is what she was
that's
saying.
what
Sorry.
that's
Yeah,
what
yeah,
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 yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I disagree with that too, but I think that that's something that we could talk about. Um, but this is the so in some ways, what I hear Kali and Leo saying is like we really need to focus on getting people engaged in some sort of like regular material practice where then there's a basis to have these discussions maybe later on in a strategic way or a tactical way of how we're going to approach some of these electoral things, because I think also there's a thing that does come up, right, which is like if your party wins or if your party stops the Democrats from winning, which is what these are the things that people bring up, then like what is that going to mean for me in a very like more so the spoiler conversation comes up a lot, which I'm fine with at this point. I'm like I don't actually think it's worse, like the argument that it's worse under the Republicans than the Democrats, like I just don't think that at this point really holds a lot of water. Even as there are changes, there are things that they go after, but that's also the case with the Democrats that they go after a lot of different folks for a lot of different, reasons. So, you know, anyway, I guess that's the question that I have though is like on some level, there's a part of me that says continuing to engage with this process and promoting this process as a way to do politics or to change things is some way feeding into the um same kind of belief system that people have that causes them to vote for the Democrats in the first place, if that makes sense. Like that we're saying we agree with you. We're gonna do the thing that you're saying we should do. We're gonna vote. We're just gonna vote differently. Um, and I'm not rigidly against voting either, but I do think that when you look at it from a kind of revolutionary perspective of different revolutionary movements who have included voting and things like that, it's usually a tactical consideration at a certain point of the struggle of like, oh, we might be able to take this right now, or we might be able to do this thing on the local level, or we need some people inside that are going to help us to deal with this. And I don't really think at any point in the US currently that we have movements that actually are engaging it where there's a strong enough base of the movement that it's actually going to really translate over to what's happening in the electoral arena. So anyways, I'll stop talking there. I know that's not very clear, but y'all are welcome to like push
No,
back
you're
after your
you're
thoughts.
clear. You're clear, and it's my conundrum that we've been. I mean, it's been like a year of me saying this over and over again, right? Like, how do you talk realistically about engaging in a system that only exists to give you something to engage in that's not actually going to change anything, right? Like engaging in the system as it exists is useless, right? Like for the most part, no matter who's in the White House, materially for most people nothing is changing, right? And it doesn't matter. And even in saying like locally, you can have some effect if you have people who are actually interested in improving the conditions of the people within their immediate community. Yes, but all of that is still guided by whatever federal monies and rules and regulations and all these things that happen. So this has always been my question, right? Like, how do you engage in something that it to me feels like only exists to keep people on the hamster wheel, right? But the other question is, in not engaging, right, you then leave all the decisions to the people who don't give a shit about your material conditions, right? Like, in the end, if you don't at least attempt to push a voting block or to push so that there's somebody local or to get a third party to be more visible so that maybe next time around they can't just pretend they don't exist, right? Like, if you don't do that, then that also doesn't change your material conditions. Like, there, you know what I mean? So in my opinion, people just have to try the thing that they think is at least going to have them feeling personally like they are engaging in a way that allows them to do something, right? And that's going to look different for everybody. For some people, that's going to be not voting, right? But helping with the local food bank and all those things. And as long as you're aware that that organization that you're helping, or that community group that you're helping, or that, you know, public fridge that you were able to put up is only going to survive if you have people on the other side also fighting, right? Like, it's impossible. It's impossible in this system, because the goal is to keep everybody on the hamster wheel. The goal is to keep everybody worrying about paying their bills and getting food and keeping a roof over their head and all these things, so that they can't be engaged in a way that all of us are saying this shit sucks and we got to overthrow this shit completely, because it's never, like, we can't keep surviving like this. But people are so afraid of not getting the little bit of crumbs that they get to survive, that for the most part, people are willing to just sit back and be like, I'll just go and do my thing every 4 years and I'm not going to argue. And it's a tough, it is a conundrum, and it is a really hard one to answer. And I never want to be the person to tell people you have to vote, you can't not vote. Like, I just feel like people have to do whatever they feel like is going to allow them. I don't even want to say it that way. I'm gonna stop there, because I was about to say something. Now I think I'm gonna be myself tomorrow for saying it right
now. So I think, again, when you talk about like the ground game, I think each of us can go outside and see a politician's stake in somebody's yard, right? So they're door knocking and they're constantly getting at a thing, right? And so even Jared, the quote that you talked, that said, Kali said, it sounds like it's like a battle of the subconscious mind versus the conscious mind. And backstage, we kind of talked about how my pops who just sit and just constantly listen to this thing, right? His action is to cut it on the TV and turn it to the view, right? He's doing the action, and subconsciously he's getting something. And it's the same thing with us, with the programs. And Renee just said this, with the programs that we're doing, when you're doing this food program, you also get into politics. And like the quote, the action will actually change the way in which we start to behave or engage. And so, to Jared's point, if we're going to be doing this electoral politics, right? And I love when Jared talks about the crisis of methodology, which is very functional in community, trying to have a conversation around that. We've tried that method, right? And maybe a few of us, even here in Atlanta, those black elites that got some of those mainnet contracts, very few of us benefit from this. They're in this method. So let's try this other method and see how that works, while we also do these same programs, like Renee says. So when it's time to kind of, okay, well, who else got other solutions? Well, these programs are actually functional. They just need to be scaled up. And the only way they can be scaled up is if we engage it in this particular way. So I think in a sense, I agree with that quote, because again, we're being creatures of habits, and we are in a environment where a lot of people really don't believe, and I don't want to say to believe, but they haven't really exercised their beliefs, right? They can believe this myth, this functional myth, and not really see it through. And so getting people in a position where they actually are seeing some of these things through. So Atlanta is the black Mecca. Go, okay, well, let's see how this looks. And then you actually find out that, again, Atlanta has the biggest wealth gap for the last 10 years. And the black population is decreasing, and Cop City is being built, and then the air is dirty as shit right now. So it's like the way around some of these myths, right? Because I think myth busting is a large portion of that. The way around these myths is to actually do that thing daily. And so I agree with the quote around the actions being able to change people's thoughts.
No disrespect to Islam, but I hear you say that. And it's like when you say the Black Mecca, in some ways it is. It costs a lot to get there, and not everybody gets what they think they're going to get from making the trip.
Ouch.
So I couldn't help it, but no disrespect. I make fun of everybody else, but the little shot there. But the reality is, I mean, that is the case. We're often told that these are Black spaces. Now it's the same thing. It's Wakanda, but we don't actually follow up. Well, what does that mean to call it that? And then what is the political economy of these spaces that we're saying? And then in terms of today's discussion, what is the mechanism for determining who's in charge? And to what extent do people have any actual say in that? Yeah.
Appreciate it. And I think Geechee too, I mean, CMB is community movement builders is a very good example, I think, of what I see as a good approach, because you do have programs, you are engaging politics in a lot of different ways. And I mean, from my conversations with Kamal, like he's very reticent to engage the policy realm unless it's on a very kind of limited, tactical, specific basis. He does engage sometimes with local elections and things like that, but it's always very, very much tied to some other kind of initiative, whether that was trying to stop Cop City or something else, right? And so I think in many ways, he and Kali, I know they worked together for a long time, and like they have a similar approach in some regard, which is like a real strong, foundational critique of the Democratic Party. And yeah, trying to get, whether it's cooperatives or whatever else, like trying to get people engaged in some other kinds of practices, but then seeing like, okay, we are going to run up against limits of what these things can do if we don't engage these other forces. So then how are we going to engage these other forces? And I think that's, to me, like that makes a lot of sense. And I think the hard part is like on a presidential election level, like we don't have the kind of force and organization to even engage it in those ways, which is like part of also why I have already voted, and I already voted third party in this election, right? So I'm not saying like don't vote, but I'm saying in terms of trying to encourage people to do something, like I do think it's very difficult for me on a local level, because like these people they all have the Harris signs up in their yard. They're like, it's like,
oh my God, it's so annoying.
It is super annoying.
So
Super annoying.
Hey, Harris and Waltz are all over the belt line. So I normally go exercise.
Wait.
And ride on the belt line.
Sorry about that, but because folks, but I am a local politician. I am on the Hickory Ridge Village Board.
There we go.
And one of the small contributions that I feel like I made and was successful on is that I said for even for our campaigns, no more signs. that there should be and no campaign financing. So there should be one sign that everybody, if you're going to get any, it should be one same sign that just simply says there is an election. Go here to learn more about the election. But this whole thing of people's faces and names all over the place and all this nonsense, and somebody got a bigger sign, so somebody got to get a bigger sign. No. So as they say, act locally, think globally. That's what I'm saying. I do everything. Now can we have the revolution, please? I will even be on the Hickory Ridge Village Board. That's it. Now. All right, sorry. All right.
But it's legit though, right? Like it's almost overwhelming. And I see the signs and I wonder to myself, like, do people understand that for someone who is watching an entire population of people get blown off the earth, that looking at that sign, every time I see one, what I see is I support genocide. That's the sign I see. I don't see Harris Waltz. I see I support genocide, right? And when I see a Trump sign, I support a moron. Like there's no
I support genocide and a moron.
And a moron, right? I
But-
support a genocidal moron. Like I just can't, and I can't resolve for other people why this is problematic. And so this is the problem that I encounter, is that people who I deeply love and who I have been friends with for decades, and who, you know, I would do just about anything for, will actually say to me, well, it'll just be worse under Trump. And I'm like, I don't understand where you live. Like, I don't understand what you're watching. I don't understand where you got this idea from. I'm still waiting for someone to paint this picture for me that explains like where's the line of fascism that we're going to cross, that's going to make it so much worse than police officers who will shoot up a train car of people just trying to go to work because someone didn't pay their $2.90. Shout out to Mani for her article in BAR the other day. Like, I can't resolve this in my mind. And I really want people to just like be logical, right? There is no such thing as a worse genocide, period. I don't even want to engage in that stupid ass conversation. There is
but we have to. We have to though. Like, but I think that's a part of like the ground game thing. Like their ground game. I mean, obviously the propaganda is immaculate, but their ground game, again, that's evidence that somebody's door got knocked on, and they put a sign up, and there's a conversation. And so Jared, as you, and the younger Jared, by the way, as you talked about.
We got to do a better way than that. We don't have to do it
J
that way.
man.
I'm
telling you,
young Jared,
J-Dub, but this whole he the
like
old one, so we going, you know, I don't want to.
I like Young Jay. Young Jay is pretty cool. Coming from Atlanta. So one of the things, even with CMB, a project that we're working on, I'm trying to merge Maynard Jackson with Lennon. And maybe if we can fit in a little George Jackson, right? And to get around this idea of like, as Renee says, she sees genocide and a moron genocide. But we don't have an environment where people are focusing on public policy and policies. It's people, it's parties, it's personalities, and it's pigment. That's just where we at. Like that's how people are emotionally engaging in the voting process, right? And so one of the projects that we're working on, again, is getting people in a position where, and we're doing some research that's getting data on the community here in Pittsburgh where we're organizing it, and allowing them to kind of speak on their pain points and material conditions so that we can build a policy platform around them. Again, Maynard had this really good idea that never ran off, and he went into, getting Black people contracts. But again, I think we have to use our ground game to develop a climate where we are not only having people focus and intelligently, sophisticatedly speak about public policy, but in return, we also will be starting developing candidates among us who can run and kind of win for office. Like, Jared, that book behind you, like Callie them did in Mississippi. But there's a lot of things in that book when they talk about a non-reform is reform that I feel like people on the left are not ready to struggle around and deal with, right? It's easy to kind of sit, wherever you at and talk about, revolutionary shit, as my homeboy Safo said, like, and this is for the left and the cultural nationalists. My homeboy Safo used to say, okay, Omar Wali, I am Hotel. That's cool and all, but what you gonna do about the sewage in these people's yard, right? And I would say, like, cultural nationalists, pan-Africanists, internationalists, that's cool, but the water and air is dirty as shit. So we still got to deal with that. And the majority of people there suffering from that, even as they emotionally vote for this Black lady, right? And again, the contradictions of I remember on Breakfast Club when they was like, oh yeah, Butch, you're going against these two Black women while you supporting the other, as if Kamala is not. She's married to the other and she's in the other's party. I mean, so we can't get to those contradictions because it's just personality, pigment, and and parties. Like policy is just out of the window. I've actually stopped more people when I say, okay, well, what policies do they have that make you want to support for them? That's not a conversation people are having. So I think that ground game, which is exhausting, Renee, I understand it's exhausting, but that's what we got to do.
But it's not just the ground game. It's that what we were talking about before the show. It's that obviously they have major media mechanisms. It's not necessarily knocking on doors unless it's more of a digital knock via MSNBC and every Black targeting podcast in terms of these kinds of it's Steve Harvey saying, even when he's performing the role of a journalist, he's condemning his critics who raise the question. But when he tells them, of course I'm throwing softballs to Kamala. Of course I'm not challenging Kamala. My job is to get her elected. What are you talking about? He's sitting there saying that. So there's not even a pretense. Maybe there's a pretense, a slight pretense more in some of these more commercial professional media spaces, but it's basically the same sentiment. In my classes, when I asked students that same question, well, what policies? If they answered at all, it was strictly a verbatim repeat of what she said during her debate. Small business loans, what is it? The home loan, and I don't know. Really, I think that was really it. I don't think there wasn't
supermarket prices. Is it supermarket prices?
Maybe something about the price gouging,
student loan debt.
But I pointed out, if you listen to her first press conference responses, Kamala, it was like a Freudian slip of sorts when she called it price gauging in her answer, because she didn't even know what the hell she's talking about. She's just reading something. She thought it was the word gauge. She's just regurgitating something. She's not even, so it's even on her end. I don't even know what I'm saying. I'm just saying this stuff because really all I'm saying is I'm not him.
Right. And if you look at the policies that have been laid out on the website, a lot of it, I was
from like last week, right? They just got there like last week.
They just got there, but also it is literally what she said in her speech at the DNC. Like some of it is word for word what she said in her speech at the DNC. So it is, and I guess for me, I really want people to like understand that what they're being told and what they think they know have nothing to do with the actual realities of what is happening based on the decisions and the policies and the actual things that get put forward. And Geechee, this is all your fault because we were supposed to do that questionnaire. I put it to you. You never, we never did the questionnaire. That's all you. I'm whatever, calling it out. But Geechee
Summer Jam screen is
Geechee be stepchilding me. I be sending him stuff. It takes him 3 days to answer.
Stop doing that.
Whatever.
Stop doing that. Don't do
that. But I mean, when people say to me things like, well, she's going to do this thing for homeowners. And I want people to really look at what that means. If you are buying a house, what is $25,000 going to do for you, right? Like $25,000 that is actually going to help you purchase a house means you're buying a house of what size where? Because $25,000 is not much when you start looking at closing costs. You got to put your 20% down to avoid the interest and the da-da-da-da-da-da. There are all these things. And when you actually read the policy on it, because I love my Saturday people, and I sat down and I read that whole 84-page document on what she's going to do for the middle class, right? And her goal is to team with private equity firms to build these houses, right? So where are we going with that? Like, what house do you think you're getting with a $25,000 help? Like, you're not getting a house with that, right? And so it's just, the absurdity of the whole thing that you're going to just take her at her word. Like, these are not the same people who sat with Bernie Sanders in 2020 and told y'all you were going to get $15 per hour that you never got. That you were going to get the rest of your money that you never got. Like all the things they've already told you that they didn't do. And you still taking them at their word. And as Hiram always says, they're like laughing in your face. They doing it in your face. And you're just like, yeah, it's cool. I'm good.
They said,
with it.
remember they told, this is what I keep saying, like they told us in '08 that Obama, if he gets us, which he didn't do until the second term anyway, if he gets us not universal, if he gets us Obamacare, we'll be one step closer to universal health care. And then as I reminded, Kamala didn't even say a word about health care. As if, so this idea that we're advancing, we're not advancing. All it's just holding this thing together so that the exploitation, and then it slightly gets, symbolically at least, a little bit worse with a Trump or something like that. But it doesn't. We're never making any real advance, and that's why again we have to. If we're going to engage in electoral politics at all, it has to be on some very different basis, and that's where I end up.
Yeah, and so I mean, I think for me, so I want to go back to something you said earlier, Renee, which is this is one of the things that that we hear that I'm not sure that I agree with. Right? You said something along the lines of like, if we leave all the decisions to the enemy, right, or whatever, like it gets worse. I mean, that is, I agree with that. But it's also true that they're all the enemy, right? And so, like, I think that my part of my thinking around this like does have to do and is informed by certain autonomous movements, like, so one example that we talked about recently on the show was Abat Lali, which is the shack dwellers movement in South Africa, right? And so they come about it from a point of like, okay, the ANC came into power post apartheid, it did what it did. It got certain things. There's certain developmental projects that have happened as a result of their rule, etc. But ultimately, like, they're not serving us, right? And so they take a strictly oppositional posture, basically, to the state, which doesn't mean that they don't work, that they won't meet with, that they won't negotiate, that they won't demand things of the state, right? But they recognize like these people are the problem, and so is this other party, etc. And so we're actually not going to engage. This has changed a little bit over time, but for a long time it was like we're not going to engage with like telling people to vote or to whatever, because we can't hold these people accountable. We're going to be oppositional to all of them, basically, and we'll organize ourselves on that basis, and then we'll self-organize certain things, right? We will protest and combat around certain things, right? But we're not going to sort of hand our politics over or endorse some of these other candidates. And there's other examples of movements like this. I mean, I think one of the interesting ones too is to think about some of the Islamic movements, whether it's Hezbollah or, I mean, Hamas is a different kind of history. Hezbollah is really interesting this way because, like, in the beginning, like one of their main, platforms was basically like a regime either collaborates with Israel and the United States or it doesn't, right? And if it doesn't, then okay, we can work with it and we can figure out like how are we going to, we might want to push for certain things. We're gonna form our militia and everything else, and our social base and this kind of stuff. But if it does, then that's the thing that we're gonna like attack, basically, is this collaboration, this involvement. And I mean, I think that's in some ways like one of the things also that was said early on is a lot of people do engage by voting. It's true. I mean, actually, I was surprised in 2020 how high it was. It was actually 2/3 of eligible voters voted in the 2020 election, which is the highest since 1900. Right. So that this is one of the problems too, is that like all of that promotion of voting that goes out there is actually working on people. It's actually causing people to do it. But even still, like I think it was 70 to 75% of voters were white. And so it's over. White people are voting at a very high pace, and once you get into black folks and people of color, it is lower. And some of this also that doesn't engage people who can't vote, right? Because of either whether it's felony convictions that prevent them from it, or citizenship status, right, that prevents them from being able to, or whatever. Um, And so I also, part of my question too is like, who are we trying to organize and around what? And I wonder sometimes whether like going to that, the people who are the voters, the people who are going to put the signs up in their yard or whatever, like again, back to that kind of easier to act our way out of a certain form of thinking than is like it. I think they've already made a decision in some level of like, this is what politics looks like and how I'm going to engage in it. And I think maybe there is a better potential among people who are like, fuck politics. Like this stuff doesn't do anything for me. Neither of these parties ever helped me out, which there are a lot of people like that. Um, the hard part about them, I think, is do they like then how do you get them engaged in a politics, right? That is maybe not around voting, right? Or convince them of a different form of politics. And maybe it's not even framing it in some ways as politics initially, but just trying to do something locally that gets people involved in something that meets some of their material needs or whatnot. Anyway, that's part of my thinking and questioning around it too, is like, if we know we're going to have to fight these people either way on any agenda, then why not approach it first from that basis of kind of a kind of principled disavowal and a principled uh like like basically saying this is not a legitimate system, right? And so we're not going to participate in it because it is it is propaganda, it's a war machine, it is an empire, it has these specific purposes that have nothing to do with us ultimately. And I mean, they impact us, of course, right? But they're not uh they're not based off our desires or what we want. They don't care about what we think politically ultimately. So yeah, I mean, that's part of where I'm coming from on this point as well, is just whether it's better to just kind of actually get people out of a mindset of like, I'm going to engage locally or in these ways on politics, unless there's already a very well defined way that we're going to do that.
But and I think that's, and maybe I wasn't clear because I'm not engaging with these people with the purple signs on their lawns. Like I'm not doing it, right? Like I'm over it. I'm not engaging in that conversation. I'm the person walking through my neighborhood, walking the dog, where my vote Socialist 2024 or my Kafie, or like there's a flag in my windshield. Like I'm over it, right? I'm not engaging in that. But what you said, like you're impacted by it, whether you engage in it or not, right? So the decision has to be, how do you respond to the fact that you are ultimately impacted by it, right? Like we did a Black August thing last summer, and Imani Oakley, who ran in 2020 and came on the show like a long time ago, had like a flat out argument during this conversation about how you organize around needing things. And she posed the question of, okay, you put up your community garden, right? You're growing things, you're giving things to the community members, you don't sell stuff, you just grow it. And then the city changes their ordinance and they decide that you can't have your garden anymore, right? How do you fight that? And you can put your body in front of the bulldozer, but they're as likely to run you over as they are to arrest you and take you out the way. So how do you combat that actual situation where no matter how much you try to avoid being a participant in the system, you are impacted by the system? And I will never forget her asking that question, because that is what created the conundrum in my head, right? Like, how do you organize around finding ways to live through a system that is created for you to not survive? Because then ultimately the system wants us all to be on the hamster wheel. It wants us all to be worrying about paying bills and how are we going to get this done and how are we going to survive this problem. Like, that's what it wants, because while you're worrying about surviving, you are not worrying about the fact that the reason you can't survive is because of these people that put you in this capitalist system to begin with. Like, that's why you're in the hamster wheel, is because for them, you have to be in the hamster wheel. They can't keep going the way they're going if you say, wait a minute, I'm getting off this wheel and I'm going to force you to do something different. So how do you make that part, like, how do you rationalize that part for people who really understand that the system is shot the way it is? And this is my problem. I don't really have an answer, but this is why I'm always trying to dig in stuff and why I'm always down a rabbit hole, because I feel like if I can at least point people to evidence that proves the thing that you think is not, right? You thinking that Kamala Harris is going to give everybody $25,000 and that's going to help you is nonsensical, right? $25,000 is it's a 20% down payment on a house that costs $125,000 and does not include your closing costs. It does not include all the shit you have to pay for before you even get to that place, the inspections and this and that. And
$120,000 house, you're not moving that far either. So like,
right.
And the interest gonna go even higher for your little
short trip. You'll be right down the same street you on right now.
So again, I think I want to cauliflower back off of one of those examples, right? So the person with the bulldozer, and before they put their bodies on the line, which there's an argument that it will take our bodies on the line, but before they put their bodies on the line, shout out to Hiram who shared August Nips, the ballot, the streets, or both. And him talking about how, in Lenin's perspective, is to use the electoral politic in an undemocratic society is a way to count your support. And so if we are engaging in electoral politics, it will be nothing more than to PE and count your supports. So the person who's engaging in electoral politics knows there's a large segment of people who's going to be on the line with them to put their bodies in front of the bulldozer. But if you're asking and engaging at all, it will just be you out there getting trampled, and then people just going to keep going on and forget about it. So I do think, again, tactically using something that's there to help us, better organize. And again, if you start talking about united fronts, as Daruba talked about, I'm just curious, what are the policies that are going to be centered around us uniting around, and what are we uniting around? Because I think just as well as the people who are staunch blue and vote blue no matter who, functionally they're almost like the radical left who say, I don't really deal with that shit. They both aren't helping the material condition of the people.
So I would just say I don't necessarily, so for me, yeah, I'm not helping the material condition of the people, and I'll be honest about that, right? I wish I was more involved in organizing and so on and things like that. But like when I think about, for instance, the LA Tenants Union, just to use an example, right? Like they are organizing people in rent strikes that are in some cases getting like basically a collectively bargained version of rent control within their own apartments and things like this. Or if we think about Abba Halali, like they're organizing to get basically they're housing people and providing them with social services within a community where that is, otherwise they would be homeless and just totally like without those things. And so I do think, and I wish more of that kind of thing was happening in the United States, right? But like I look at like what CMB is doing, or also what Kali Akuno is doing and kind of advocating for. And like Kali's main thing right now is kind of around pairing mutual aid with community defense, right? And so saying like, okay, I want to get people they're already engaged in some of these mutual aid practices, some of these urban farming, whatever, right? Like let's link these things up as much as possible so that we could start to at least do some percentage of what people need in terms of their food, their basic needs, right? And then let's also get them engaged in practices of defense, because if we really think that fascism is coming, then it's coming either way. It may come faster if the Democrats get elected even than it might come if the Republicans come. And people should really listen to that conversation we had with him, because I think he lays out a really good argument both against the kind of popular front, like we have to vote Democrat thing, as like never having worked historically in stopping actual fascism, but also that like, if the Democrats win, it may mean that the right also still has more power within the system, I mean, because these, part of his argument is it's easier sometimes to lead from the sidelines than it is to be the face of the thing. And I think we can go back to that in a minute, because I do want to go back to the Trump discussion a little bit. But so that's my argument more is than saying like people should just non-engage in some kind of like, moral, or like I want to divest from this thing, because that more is about how I feel, right, as an individual, which doesn't really do anything. And you can acknowledge that. And getting people, and this is hard too, I'm not saying it's easy, right, but getting people to engage in specific practices together where then they can have political education within those spaces, as then they think about how am I going to engage in electoral politics, that there's at least a good political foundation to have discussions and debates about that, and think about, okay, what are we going to do tactically, strategically? So that's more what I mean. I just wanted to clarify that point a little bit.
I just want quickly, if I understand, to the extent I'm following everybody's threads here, that's been how the only way I've been able to conceive of engaging these topics, to say I want, and because again, I'm with Renee on, I'm not built for, let me convince the people with the purple signs in their lawns, and I don't even think I'm built for, at this point, what I've heard people compare the mythologizing of the lumpen's capacity for revolution with the capacity for those who are disaffected and not voting from being brought into the process on some level. So I'm sensitive to that, but I don't think that, like, I'm not built for that anymore either. This, to make the argument to the non-voter, to the people that just say, fuck it, I'm not doing anything, to say, well, then at least you come and do da da da. I'm not even built for that anymore. The only thing I feel like, if anything, that I'm built for at this point is to say that those of us who have already made reached a certain level of clarity, we're not voting for Democrats. We don't even really mess with the vote in the first place. We would like to elevate the struggle, for us to get on the same page vis-a-vis the vote, so that we're all on the same page, saying whenever we engage these discussions, wherever we are, we're doing it for this collective purpose, for the PE, because then I often do think if the revolution that I fantasize about is ever going to happen, we got to be able to do these basic things. We got to be able to simply cast a vote in solidarity with one another, or set up a YouTube collective in solidarity with one another. Like these, what should be. And then, because if we're ever going to get anywhere else, we got to be able to do this, and that's where I want to at least spend my energy, saying, if okay, you want to talk about voting, we have to talk about voting. We feel compelled on some level to talk about voting. This is the only way to do it, and then have us all come to terms on that. So go ahead. Yeah.
No. So I think back to that Jared raised the quote, right? So it's easier for people to act their way into new forms of thinking than to think their ways into new forms of action. And maybe not being inconvincing with the people in the purple signs in the yard, but being in community with them, right? And inviting them to the PE potlucks. So bring your little chips and dips, and I'm going to bring my sour bears and my Brother Thelonious beer.
So Renee, you and I will send Geechee out to do
no.
us.
See, you missed it again. I say be in community. Bad. You ain't sending me nowhere. You coming with me, and you gonna bring Renee. You could bring, I don't know what you eat in Jersey, but Jared, you could bring your cauliflower, and I'm gonna make some hibiscus rice, and then we're gonna have a PE potluck like we used to do in Eastern Kentucky. We're gonna have a PE potluck, and Yeah, just I think being in community with them, which is a longer game, right? You ain't gonna probably convince them, but highlighting contradictions in community sometimes is beneficial.
And you're not wrong, right? You're not wrong at all. And I agree. And Jared already knows we're locking step with this. So, like, I do these meetings all the time. Like, we meet every month and we pick a topic about policing to talk about, and we engage in the whole. Like, this is so. This is that definitely is part of the process. Now, I will say, I don't know how many people are showing up to that monthly meeting who have a purple sign in their lawn, right? But I can also say that I have decided, you know, I'm not even gonna fake around people anymore, right? Like, I had a friend who invited me to do like these wine sip things while we write things for Kamala Harris. And I got the text and I wrote back to the group chat and I was like, I ain't coming, but y'all gonna take a minute to consider Khalifa Williams, who's about to be killed by the state, and your party that you're about to write postcards for has taken removing the death penalty off of their policy platform. And it was dead silence, right? Like, people don't expect you to say things like that because they just want you to either shut up or go along. And I've decided that I just don't have it in me to be that person anymore. So when I show up at things and I've got my Palestinian flag or I'm wearing my t-shirt, I get barked at all the time. Like, do you have to do it? And I'm like, yeah. Because even if I'm the only person in the room that's going to remind you that the world that you think you're living in is not the world you're living in, I'm okay being the only person that does that. And I think it's important. But what I'm not going to do is I am not going to have a fight with somebody who has already decided that Kamala Harris is the thing. Because if you've already made that decision and you're unwilling to engage in that in a reasonable conversation, because I tell people, I'm not trying to convince you of shit, right? I am telling you the reality of this situation. And the reality of this situation is your girl Harris, her entire career as an attorney was through a prosecution office. She didn't work one day as an attorney where she was not prosecuting other people. Not one, right? And so that is a reality. That means she has always been lock in step with law enforcement. That means she has always worked with police. That means she has always worked in a system that from the core of it has been against working and non-white people. Period. So you can be mad at me for that fact, but it's still a fact. And you can engage in that conversation, or you can decide like, oh, well, Renee just wants whatever nonsense people say about like, I'm gonna let Trump in and blah, blah, blah. Like, whatever, you can't change the fact. And that's really what you're mad at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, I mean, it's the conversations, right? So earlier today on the show, we talked about how the judge from Georgia who who initially blocked the student loan program that Biden them had. And that judge was appointed by Bush, who practiced law around banking, right? So of course they're gonna side with capital. And so I think by having that type of conversation, that's layers and depth that some of these people just aren't there. Like, so sometimes it might have to be like dumbed down basic conversations. But I agree, like it is exhausting. But I mean, I guess in terms of personality, sometimes whether we arguing online or in community, I think people's tolerance and people's tactics and sharing with people. And then again, in organizations, sometimes it takes somebody in your organization saying it differently. It's almost like with people who are married and you say something to your partner and then they don't get it, and then they go out in the community and get it from somebody else and come and tell you the same thing that you said. I mean, it takes different tactics and different personalities, but in a collective fashion. So I think it's worth developing a block style voting and people who can move in a united front in a more political, sophisticated way, as opposed to reaction.
That is true, because I'm often told that I don't hear things my wife says until someone else says it to me outside the house.
Watching Jared get punched. Douche. Ooh.
Start seeing shoes flying.
Look, she giving him the side eye right now too. Look,
I'm sure that's true. I get told the same thing, and it's also true. Yeah. I'm sure she's right about that.
About
Did
that
you have
and
more you want to say on that?
everything. Yeah, no, just about that and everything. Yeah.
So somebody, I mean, first of all, thank you, Michael, for becoming a member of the show. Appreciate it. Scott, thanks for the contribution. I wanted to bring up this point Scott raised, which I think dovetails with some of where I wanted to go to on this claim that it is easier to organize under a Democratic Party. And I think that, you know, there's a trick to this question, right? Because I think a lot of times when you are under a Trump or something else, like a lot of what you are doing is playing defense, right? So it is true that you are constantly trying to organize people against the bad policies that he's implementing. My argument would be that under Democratic politicians, it's the same, but people don't organize against them because, you know, it's one, because it's hard. A lot of us don't organize with Republicans. First of all, we have a lot of disagreements with conservative folks, understandably, for principal reasons. And when they're oppositional to the left, it tends to be to push more of a right-wing agenda, right? Whereas at least when there's something like Trump, part of what happens is a lot of liberals then, and those moments, become more interested in, okay, I will show up to the airport during the Muslim ban and, violate certain laws to try to get these people, legal representation, etc. Or I will join some of the abolish ICE organizing that's going on, or the George Floyd, uprising, get into the streets for these things. And so in some ways, again, like, if I really don't want to rely, and this is one of the problems often that happens, is that then because there's so many liberals that come into organizing in those times, that the organizing takes on a liberal form of character, and then when voting comes back around, which it will, then they're all going to say, hey, what we need to do now is vote for the Democrats to end this. So in that way, it can become its own hamster wheel and has its own problems. But in the very least, the politics of protests and organizing often take on more of a mass character in certain ways when the right is in power. And so both are problem and both are limited, and both you're dealing with the same shitty system. But I disagree with the idea that it's easier to organize when the Democrats, like, any organizer that I'm in conversation with will be like, no, like, that's when everybody goes the fuck home and doesn't come out and doesn't participate in this stuff and doesn't, because ultimately they don't have a problem with it if the Democrats are doing it, right? And so, yeah, I just wanted to say that. I don't know if either of you have thoughts, or any of you have perspective on that.
And that's the problem, right? Like, when you consider the amount of policies that Biden continued from Trump, right? Which a lot of them were policies that Trump continued from Obama, right? Like, and all of a sudden everybody was like, no, we can't do this thing. And then Biden continued it, and everybody's like, oh, all right, it's okay now, right? And so, I think it was like 2 weeks ago, Jared, that we had that little clip from Linda Sarsour, right? Talking about, and she is one of these people who, she is adamant that organizing was worse when Trump was in, because people were more aggressive, right? And I'm like trying to understand, like, what is she watching when, right, like literally 2 days ago at Temple, the students were trying, a girl's hijabi got ripped off her head, right? Like, the police came, they arrested students. Like, I'm like, what are we talking about right now where we are engaging in this dumbass conversation about like, oh, well, it's so much harder. It's so much worse. Like, people are literally getting arrested and bombarded and thrown off campuses. We got brilliance being, they trying to throw brilliance out the country from Cornell. Like, we got all this stuff happening right now. And I'm like, what part of this is easier for people? Please clarify for me. Let me know, because I want to know what part of what's happening right now is easier that we are all like so excited to stick with.
I think some of it is, I mean, there's some ebbs and flows. So for instance, we saw the Ferguson stuff pop off under Obama. We saw there were Troy Davis protests under Obama. It's not like everything goes home, but of course, Michael Brown and Troy Davis get killed under Obama. So, which I think should be part of the point. So my thing is I kind of feel like having a similar response. Okay, fine. All right. By the way, I've heard the same thing. Like, we had the extremes from when, and I know this is not the activism we're talking about, but Al Sharpton said, I'm not going to protest Obama when he got elected the first time. Sharpton just, again, out the gate clear. We're standing down. So if anybody's asking me, I'm telling you. And it was, yeah. Or we've also heard people in the Democratic, the so-called Progressive Caucus report similarly that funding dried up, their efforts dried up, everything slowed down when Obama got elected. We hear that claim. And then I know that there's some issues with nonprofits, like maybe it's a little easier to get the funding if Trump is in office than versus, but the point that I want to advocate is that, okay, fine. If you say it's better or worse under whichever situation, operate under that assumption and keep pushing for more. So like if the easier opponent gets elected, then why don't we have universal health care, an end of war, name it. I mean, name something. Why don't we have anything? So it at some point I would want people to hopefully be more honest about the similarities in these efforts between the two and move somewhere else. But I'm willing to, if yeah, that's it.
So I put in a private chat, like, what crew is it easier for? If you see those list of people on that face, Angela Rise, Al Sharpton, what you just named.
Oh, wow.
And so I think, I don't know, me, their bottom line, if red is in office or blue is in office. But again, I think back to the point, there's not enough sober conversation.
Oh, they're there with Diddy in this clip?
Yeah, Diddy's in there.
Oh, my goodness.
You want me to play it, Geechee? I could play
it. No, don't play it. Just see, just
no, don't play it.
Just see the image. But but when we get harder or easier, it's like that crew right there. I don't think we give that crew enough credit. The Angela Rise, the AOCs, the Jamal Bowman, the Olay, and all these people. But they actually help us not be able to conceptualize independent working class revolutionary political action. Like they help us. They're I don't want to say single-handedly, but they're doing a hell of a job. They're like the Jordan of political punditry, and they are very effective at what they're doing. I mean, maybe we might say they have failed on the Breakfast Club with the Green Party, but they had intentions and tactics to do that, right? And so I think because we're still in like voter fetishism, which August Nips talked about, the Stacey Abrams, Jamal Bowman, Cori Bush, and AOC, all these people are just keep moving us farther and farther away from like honest conversation around what it would look like to actually get into some political shit, right? So, I mean, you have Jamal who will tell you that he has political power as they take his ass out of office 2 weeks later. So,
I think that's another point that I think is under discussed is what happens when you win, right? And this is one of the reasons why actually Kali Akuno is one of my favorite thinkers around this stuff, is because like, and I'll find the video, but he did a great video, and there's also reflections on it in the book. But you know, and he and Kamau at a certain point like ended up disagreeing and basically leaving the political organization that they were with at the time over some differences around this, because you know the challenge is like what are when people get elected into these offices, like what do people actually think that they are able to do with them under capitalism, with the corporate forces having so much say and influence, with the fact that if you go against those forces that different aspects of the state are going to come after you, all kinds of stuff. um that I think often we have a very kind of, and this is part of my issue with like the DSA approach, is that you have a very kind of, I mean, one, it's an extremely long game, which like always bothers me with climate change and things like this, of like, do we really have 50 years to invest in trying to get enough progressives in office that they actually could change the political agenda in some way? You know, yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure that that is a thing. Um, but beyond that, like on a local level too, you get people elected to city council, you get people elected to a mayor's office. Maybe if you're like really well organized and really lucky and have the right conditions. And even then, it, you know, you might be able to work with them on certain things, but also they're going to be a problem for you, and it's going to be a difficulty of, okay, now I have this relationship with these people. I've helped get elected. Do I try to defend them against, you know, in terms of the bad policies that they're now a part of, that they have, you know, either voted yes on or not stopped or whatever? You know, do I defend them when the right is also going to be attacking them, and they're going to be attacking them for the different reason, right? That they're communist or socialist or whatever other terms they're going to throw out to that we would want to say, no, we want to defend those terms and those politics, but actually this person is not embodying those politics right now. And then, you know, as movements, you have to make different demands of the state. You have to protest, you have to organize around certain things with relation to the state. And uh you know, then it puts you in this awkward position of like, sometimes, I mean, just think about it this way, like it's sometimes more difficult to argue with or fight with your friend over something than it is to fight with your enemy, than to be very clear about like, no, this person is our enemy, they're our opposition. We're going to figure out all the ways that we're going to organize around them to try to push for what we want. And that, you know, that's much harder on a national level, but on a local level, it is something that is a real thing where sometimes organizations can be successful organizing against politicians and interests on a local level. But often the argument is that we have to get progressives, or we have to get certain people inside to be able to like work with us, and that might work in some limited examples. It really depends on how that progressive is going to conduct themselves in office. Um, but a lot of times, what you see is then this kind of, you know, the nonprofits and the organizations that help get this person into office become ardent defenders of them, even as they're pushing out really bad policies. Like, you know, LA is a good example of this with like the BLM folks and like Karen Bass and stuff like that. Um, where you get this situation where people are defending these, like you brought these people to office around to defund the police and to like, you know, let's get a progressive prosecutor in office and these kind of things. And then these people are doing the same, you know, they're then become very pro cop, and now you're defending them, you know. So that's the other side of it, I think, that is often not discussed enough, is that even these local, and I'm not trying to be rigid, like, because I do believe that elections can be engaged on some level tactically, and that movements have to be able to consider these things of like, okay, we want to run this candidate because we're going to try to do this, or we want to try to get this policy through because we're trying to do this, and it's part of a bigger strategy. It's not because we think the system is good or redeemable or whatever else. But I think a lot of times the opposite of this ends up happening, where it's like then you become beholden or defensive of this person in a way that actually hamstrings your movement worse than if it was your enemy.
but you don't have to be, right? And this is where I take issue with a DSA is you don't, just because you help get that person elected, you don't have to sit back and then line up and say, okay, well, we're going to support them no matter what. We would be better off if these organizations would say, yo, we didn't send you in there to do that. We're done. You're cut off, right? And I think the bigger problem is that people are unwilling to do that, right? They would much prefer as an organization to tout and say, oh, well, we got this person in, this person's in, than to pay attention to the fact that you sent them in there to do one thing and they got there and they forgot what their whole purpose was. And I have such a struggle with that, just because I want people to just be real. Like, can we just say, like, okay, AOC fooled me. I thought she was cool when she came out and she told her whole story. And, I watched that documentary that came out by, oh Lord, I just forgot the name of the group. And I was part of it and everything. But anywho, like there was a whole thing where her and what's her name from West Virginia, like they had
and that
a
Rising Sun, right? But their rise, isn't it? Sorry,
no, it's BNC.
I thought
Brand New Congress. They did the documentary, and it was AOC. It was, and I can't believe I'm forgetting. It was Cori Bush, AOC, and Lord, she would kill me if she heard me right now. She's not.
Rashida Tlaib.
No, from West Virginia.
Ilhan Omar.
No,
who's West?
Paula Jean Swearingen. It was the three of them. And there was a whole, and it followed like them, trying to win, right? And AOC was the only one that won that year. Paula Jean did not win, neither did Cori Bush. Cori Bush ended up winning the next campaign that she did. And, when people see AOC now and she's doing this nonsense that she's doing because she has completely people have to just accept that you fell for it, right? You fell for it. You looked at her, you heard her talk, and you decided that she was going to be the person that she claimed she was going to be when she was sitting on the floor in Pelosi's office and saying that she would only run one term if she was going to not be the politician she promises to be. And here we are, knock down the house. Here we are years later, and she's mama bearing Pelosi and shitting on Jill Stein and all these things, right? And so at that point, people have to be willing to say AOC is full of shit. She is not the person that we thought she was when we put her in that position. And it's time for her to go, right? And people have to be willing to say that. But people are unwilling to do that because they don't want to put themselves in a bad position with AOC because she's popular. It's the same thing that Geechee talked about with the popularity and all these things. And we forgot about policy. Like it's got to be, we have got to be unafraid of just being honest about who people are. And it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
But the problem that I have, even with the use of the phrase "we got them there," is that there's an assumption, there's an over assumption on how much people contributed to this process. And so the closest I think we got was, and I'm looking at this from the outside, was the Chokwe Lumumba mayoral race in Jackson, where there was an idea that where we really are going to get someone elected who will really then be beholden to really the da-da-da-da-da. But even then, MXGM, as maybe the only organized force working to do that, wasn't big enough to sustain it. So when Chokwe, and again, this is my outsider, I don't really know, so I'm happy to be checked on this. But when Chokwe dies, and shame on him for doing that. Like, how dare he? You know what I'm saying? Like, when he dies, Antar comes in, and it's not, he's not the product of a groundswell, grassroots, organized wave force that can then hold him responsible in the way that I think people thought they could or think that they should be able to, because there's a lot of other, there's more involvement at that. Now, beyond that campaign, it's even more of an issue. So like, the AOCs and whoever else. So when I said Rising Sun, I'm thinking of that. I thought that was the nonprofit group that initially built her effort from the very beginning. I may be wrong on that too, but they had a vision for her. We all hear about her at the end stage or the latter stages of all of that, and then project onto them all the things that we, meaning those who end up supporting these candidates, want. And then when they don't get it, they fall into all the traps you all are talking about. So that's why I think we have to be, again, the we that is saying we're not voting for Democrats and we're in these left spaces, we have to get on the same page and then begin actually producing the candidates. And even if that's just a demonstration of what it should look like, I would rather do that for an endless amount of losses, whether it's counting the people we can count on or just demonstrating that this is exactly how you're supposed to be engaging, as opposed to, we got you there, now you're not doing what we want. Well, you really didn't get me there. And these other more powerful interests are really who are going to keep me here. And I want to stay here. And then I think when Mr. Porter, who I keep talking about, when he ran, my godfather and worked with Jesse Jackson's campaigns, the first one at least, he said the mistake Jesse made was he thought he could win. And then once you think about actually winning and sitting in office and then getting reelected and appeasing all of those forces, then all of a sudden it's like, and then the people that are getting you there, either they're not big enough to get you actually in and to sustain it, or you bring in larger support that can get you there, but that is only responding to your then prominence and is not really you're not really beholden to. So it's easy to be like, no, I'm not going to do that.
So I wonder if people would consider Charles Barron a win, like Chokwe, him being in office, him getting in office. I wonder. But aside from that, so I grew up playing football. We watched film, and we knew what they were going to do. And if they do something we improvise, and we have different response to it. And this is connected to a study that some of our colleagues did in Myrtle Beach in a homeless shelter, where they surveyed the people, and a lot of the people, as bad as it gets, said like, "Oh, I'm one decision away from being rich," or if I tweak this, or like. So the worst conditions doesn't automatically lead to that thing. But with the AOCs and those people, and we talked about this earlier too, like they already have a coded message to say when they don't do what they say they're going to do. Oh, it's because the Republicans are blocking it, right? Same stuff with the thing, like with the student loans. They can explicitly say these two Republican judges are blocking it, and not even know the nuance or the details, and that would be the reason why shit is not getting done. Not because these people fail. And AOC believes that, and Cori Bush's and all these people believe that, and the people who support them believe it, because they're just not really politically inclined to know what the hell is going on. They just know this pretty black lady, this pretty Latino lady, this pretty black dude or whatever is saying they're gonna, they're here for the people. And they got an ability to use fly language. So when you talk to DSA, I promise you, if you just close your eyes and listen to Jamal Bowman, you'll sound like he one of the cats from the Bronx that you rock with. Because that's just how you move and talk. So he doesn't care about the policy at that point.
Do they believe it though? Because this is always my question also. And sorry, Jared, but
no, you're fine. Go ahead.
Do people actually believe that? Like, do they actually believe that the problem is that these two judges voted against this thing? Or are they just going along with this story because they don't want you to realize that they are the problem, right? Because, there are, and listen, I am by no means a politician, right? I've been asked now a couple of times, and I just don't think I have it in me to be polite enough to run for any office, because I just feel like I'm going to get myself in trouble. But I don't see how people believe it. When people say like, oh, well, it was the Republicans that prevented this from happening, that people don't actually look at the situation and say, but you went along with what they wanted, right? Like, it's not just them. You are also part of the problem. And so I'm always wondering, when people like regurgitate the nonsense that they hear when politicians are talking, right? Do they actually believe it, right? Or are they just doing the thing that they think they need to do in order to continue the facade of they're on the right side? Because you have to know, like, if the person you are siding with is sending bombs to drop on families, right? You can't possibly, with common sense, be like, oh, well, yeah, they're doing the right thing. So, like, just right. Like, so do they actually believe it, or are they just, regurgitating and repeating the thing that they feel like they need to do in the time, even though they know it's utter horseshit?
I think I try not to do this, but I do think at this point, if people are willing to, at this point, make an argument in defense of voting for Kamala on that basis, I do think that they're just saying, even on pretty much a conscious level, I just don't care. I know she's dropping bombs on these kids and these people. I just don't care that much, or at all. I just don't care. And as I shared with you all and others, separately, when I'm on that panel and a Black woman social worker is telling me that my criticism of Kamala is demonstrating an unwillingness to support Black women, as she's defending her military contract to conduct social work in Black communities, which would be cut off more likely if Trump is elected. I think that's what they're saying. I think they're saying on some consciousness, she may be honest in thinking that I'm disrespecting Black women, but I also think she's saying to her, she's also saying, I just don't care. I care more about my community. I care more about my check. I care more about my country. I care more about my job. I just don't care enough or at all about.
But can you care more about your community that way?
I think y'all being too generous, right? So this goes back to our conversation around deliberate falsehoods. I know y'all been in arguments with people who are demonstrably false, patently false, but they're convinced that they knew what happened or they understand or this whatever. And so in that way, I mean, one can argue, yes, they believe it. They could be totally wrong, and I'm not saying that all of them. I think there are people who can see a thing and still try to avoid being accountable and whatever. But the level of engagement some of these people have, I do think they believe that shit. And then being a celebrity or being on a platform in the midst of having wrong ideas, the chances of correcting those ideas get slimmer. Because now you got people celebrating you and like, oh my, you're right. And Black Girl Magic and all that other stuff. Like, I don't know. I mean, I know Jared don't like to deal with the why and the outcome is more important, but like sometimes the why to me, I guess, is fascinating. And
it's just harder to assess. That's my only point.
Yeah.
It's harder to assess. Have you ever looked at somebody and just stopped for a second and asked them dead in their face, like, do you really believe what
I do
saying?
it all the time. I do it. I'll be like, wait, you
like,
serious?
You serious? Yeah.
Like, for real.
Yeah, I mean, this gets into like one of the things that I did want to talk about today, and I know we're going to wrap up soon, and then we'll continue this tomorrow, which I'm looking forward to. And I know Hiram's going to be there for part of tomorrow at least, so I'm looking forward to that. But this, I mean, and I think increasingly people probably noticed this due to the programming that we've had and the kind of shift in some of the programming that we've had since October 7th is like, I have had it. I'm a materialist. A lot of our stuff has been, about kind of trying to think through things in a materialist lens. But I cannot ignore the kind of psychological impacts of like election propaganda, of just bourgeois propaganda in general. But the way that this, like, you all are talking about how difficult it is to have these conversations with these people. And, Jared, actually somebody recently on a live asked for a good question, or if there were any good books around like psychological warfare and
wasn't it lying too, about lying?
In politicians and lying and psychological warfare. Yeah, which was an interesting thing, and I didn't know. But I was like, you know, I wanted to bring it to you, and maybe you can think about it, and we can maybe even talk about it tomorrow more. But like, because the whole mass communications element of all of this, and like the reality is that people are inundated with all kinds of crazy stuff, from whether they watch something like Fox News or whether they watch all of the liberal media that were from CBS to MSNBC to CNN to ABC, NBC, all of them, that they are intensely propagandized around this stuff. Then there's the election ads, which are their own form of really wild, you know, just like 30 seconds of like psychological warfare every single time. And I can't get around now at this point, especially as watching this genocide unfold over the last year has really impacted me on a psychological level on a lot of ways, of like, what are the different psychological aspects of these things? I mean, I think a lot of it does come from either I don't care, or I can't care, or like I can't actually engage with that because it would create some kind of break for me. Like, I don't know, I can't, you know, because I live around a lot of liberals, you know, and like they don't I'll bring up Palestine, you know. I'm not as brave with it probably as Renee is in interpersonal interactions around some of these people, but
Nobody is.
I do bring it up. And what I most often am confronted with is absolute silence, or like you know, yeah, that's tough kind of thing. And then like quick change the subject to sports or something like that. I mean, like, because people just, I don't think, can even allow themselves to like go into that space. And so I think the election thing is kind of like an almost an inverse of it, of like, these are these sort of sacred rituals within our society of this is how we do politics. And we've been the lesser evil thing is like so ingrained in people too. That,
I don't know
yeah,
if
I
you
mean,
remember
that's
this.
another element.
Sorry to jump in, Jared, but I don't know
No,
if you
go.
caught this, but because I know, but because you were just, you know, and I appreciate you and Jennifer for coming through, but you came through the house the other day. It happened at the house.
Yeah. Yeah, I
One
do.
of my
Yeah.
homeboys has, and I love him to death, but he's notorious for that. As soon as you bring up politics, he'll let it maybe go around, and then jokes start coming in. He's like, no, 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 no. He's like, and he did it Saturday. And I was like, and I saw it happen, and so I didn't mean to, so I'm just jumping in to say that, like, it happens all the time. Yeah.
Yeah, I also think it's important because I thought about that, and you just made me confirm it even more. When you think about the propaganda and the psychological warfare, at this point, you had the media at one point, and I guess I think y'all would say social media is a different type of beast than what we had a long time ago. But so Trump can say a thing, right, about the cats and dogs, and most people will try to monetize content on just making video of that. And then you'll see somebody doing a video trying to chew on a cat. And it's like, nobody's even thinking about what they're saying. They just kind of like, I can use that moment to make my material condition better by going viral, being popular, monetizing it. And then what actually is being said, never, like, nobody even conceptualize what's going on. So it's like, I wonder if the advent of the way we use social media is even further desensitizing or incentivizing us to kind of like engage in it that way.
And Jared, you might be giving me too much credit. I don't know if I'm okay. I might be as bold as you say, but it's but what I
You're bolder than me. I can tell already.
And me too. I don't know which Jared you were talking to, but I'm like, yeah, you're bolder than me too.
What I get a lot from people, and it irritates me sometimes, is, so like, I went to an alumni event, and we're at this like reception thing at the chancellor's house, right? And I'm wearing a shirt that says Palestine, 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 Palestine on it. Like this, that it says right down in front of the shirt. And this is a place where I know 100% they are going after the students for having an encampment, right? But I'm an alumni, and it's a Black and Latino thing, and I'm gonna go because I haven't been to campus in a while, whatever. And the amount of people who were like, yo, that's a nice shirt, or oh, I'm so thank you for wearing that shirt. And like people will praise you for saying the thing. And this is where I always catch people off guard. I always say, like, thank you, where's yours? Right? Like, why am I appreciate that you appreciate that I brought it and that I didn't care, right? Like they could have decided they weren't going to let me in, right? Because I was wearing this shirt and I knew that was a risk I was taking. But at the same time, why am I the only person? Like if you're so excited that I had the audacity to wear the shirt, wouldn't it have been easier if we were all wearing the shirt? If the 12
No, that's
people
why
who
it's
came
easier to
me,
praise you for your audacity than for us to do the same shit.
So that to me, that's the part of it why I keep pushing, right? Like that's why I've decided I'm gonna keep on, organizing with the Green Party. I'm gonna keep doing my abolition meetings. I'm gonna keep doing the show. Thank you, Jared, again. Like all these things I keep doing because I just want people to see someone do it and be like, you know what? That really took a set to wear that shirt, and I'm gonna wear my shirt next time. Right?
She got a big set of ovaries on her.
I mean, but like I feel like people have to at some point be willing to be uncomfortable. I'm willing to be uncomfortable, right? And I've decided I'm just gonna live in my as far as I'm concerned, the worst thing that could have happened to me in response to my unwillingness to silently act like I don't know what's happening in the world has already happened, right? And so for me, I already know that most people are not going to like the fact that I say the things I say, wear the things I say, do the things that I do. Like it's okay, right? But if they can't fire everybody. They can't, there's not, for as many jails as there are, they can't arrest everybody, right? The reality is that the working people and the poor people and the non, part of the system people, we are the majority here. We are the majority. So if everybody could have just a little sense of like just simple morality, like simple human decency to understand that your life is no more precious than anyone else's life. So don't be silent. Don't sit back and allow people to pretend that this stuff isn't happening. Like, it's okay to make people uncomfortable. It's okay to do it. Do it. Right? And in the moment, you might be uncomfortable with their response, but that's okay. It's okay to be uncomfortable. And if more people would be okay to be uncomfortable, maybe some more stuff could get done.
100%. It reminds me of what, as you were talking about that Good Shepherd Collective, shout out to them in Palestine. They talk about kindergarten ethics. They said we need kindergarten ethics. Like you talk to kindergartners, they understand like somebody does something really harmful to each other, like that's fucked up and that's wrong, right? And that they, and like, like liberals don't have they don't have kindergarten ethics. Like,
man, bump them kids, man. Them kids haven't had 18 more years of conditioning to suffer. Them kids, they don't know how free and easy. No, I'm just playing. You're right. No, you're right. And by the way, I should have done it properly to give it the credit it's due. I should have put the Minister Farrakhan on it, that Renee has the ovarian fortitude that many of us lack. Yeah.
Right on. I just want to plug this. I put it in the chat. So this is just to give people a little bit of context of what this discussion was. It was a reflection that Kali Akuno had in, I think, 2018 or so, that I believe it was either the late great Bruce Dixon or the late great Glenn Ford caught it, and they put it on YouTube, which Black Agenda Report doesn't do a lot of YouTube stuff, but they caught it. and it's a great. The first part of it is, I think, really interesting because it's a history. He does about 20-30 minutes of like the history of the New African movement, which I think is worth watching in its own. But then he really gets into this discussion of the problems of when you win, and even within their organization, which was a good organization, they had that his from his view there was not enough clarity on how they would move after they won, right? And again, to your point earlier, Jared, obviously that this got kind of morphed and changed also because of the unfortunate death of Chokwe Lumumba, and then you get the Chokwe Antar Lumumba mayoralship, which is just a different person. He's his son. He has a different politics, etc. Um, but I really encourage people to watch it because I think one of the things that it does is it forces people to really reckon with like what do we think that winning these things also will bring to us, and what are our goals when we're engaging in them. Like one of his things is he's like, I wanted the information on running the campaigns so that I knew who the people were that would support our movement and we could organize those people in certain ways. And he's like, and I never got that, like after all of it, I never got that information. And so anyway, it's a really good discussion. I do encourage people to check that out. Let me drop it
Can I just say
again.
real quick? I
Yeah.
years ago, I mean, I in the context of a Malcolm X grassroots national meeting, I did get to meet and talk with Chokwe about his campaign. And I wish it was public. I wish I had recorded it. I wish, obviously, a lot of different things had happened, but it was one of the more convincing arguments because I was saying to him, man, I'm in the Green Party. Why are you doing this within the Democratic Party? Like this, and I can't duplicate his answer, but it was one that was strong enough that had me convinced not only that obviously what he was doing was at minimum a worthwhile effort, but it had that kind of energy even within a Democratic Party effort of there's a political clarity around why we're doing this, and I think he was more clear about what could be done with it,
Yeah.
which is again part of the unfortunate, many
100%. And I think it's
ramifications of his
important
death. Yeah,
too. It's important too. Like Khalid, spends a little bit of time around this point also in that video to say they did run in the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party too. So
right,
even
right,
though
right, right.
it had the kind of it was within the Democratic Party within Mississippi context because of that history and lineage of organizing, Fannie Lou Hamer, SNCC, etc. Um, that they were actually able to run as Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party members, which is kind of like a sub party within their state system, which also again allowed them to tap into a certain historical lineage and a certain set of politics that would differentiate themselves a little bit from the history of just the Democratic Party more broadly, even though they did still have to contend with the overall sort of state party structure. So there is not without contradictions, but I do think that those kinds of approaches are somewhat interesting to me. Like even I have a lot of issues with the Working Families Party and the way that they do certain things, and I certainly have issues with them endorsing Kamala Harris. But I do at least appreciate that there's some intentionality on trying to develop a, a party structure that has the potential to be separate, basically, at some point from the Democratic Party. I just don't know, I just don't agree necessarily with their current trajectory on that.
I think there are logical arguments people can make for supporting Kamala and the Democrats. I don't agree with them. I think that they're politically misguided and even dangerous. But there are logical arguments people can make. It's just what is more frustrating for me is that very few people even endeavor to do that.
Right.
It's too easy to not do that. And I do just want to say, since they've been mentioned a little bit, I have personally I have a lot of fun, particularly on Black Liberation Media, making fun and taking shots at Kamau. But Kamau Franklin, but he and Kali Akuno years ago were instrumental in my own political education, and even making me join MXGM without even ever having spoken to either one of them up to that point, which I just want to, just listening to their analysis and how they approach things. So I just want to double down on your encouragement for people to check out all of that Kali Akuno stuff that you've done, that he did elsewhere, whatever. I think one day we're going to regret that neither of them have had the prominent positions in these struggles that they should have had on our march to freedom. But now that I put that on record, just make sure everybody acknowledge that I'm correct one day.
But that also has to be, and I think that's why, like JW said, like, I'm not really doing, but you are doing something, because every time I watch one of your streams and I get information from someone that I would not have previously gotten information from if it wasn't for your platform, right? Like, it gives me something else to utilize and to share. Like, I sent your channel to a friend out in California. Like, yo, you just listen to this channel, right? Like, get some information. And it's important to be a part of what I see as not a really large group of people who are willing to say and to do the thing that a lot of people don't want to do, right? Like, for all the jokes that we make about stuff, I really mean it. I am not messing with Butch Ware if he don't read Jared's book, right? Like, I'm not engaging in any communication to assist him if he does not understand the myth and propaganda of Black buying power, period. I've said it, I'm putting it out there. If I ever have a conversation with him, I'm gonna tell him myself, right? Like, these are these opportunities to give people information that they're not going to get otherwise. We cannot dismiss them and we cannot downplay them, because they are important. And it's, I know we're running out of time, but like, I sent everybody an email, a link, and the person who shared it is on Tucker Carlson's team, but they caught somebody from MSNBC who is a producer at MSNBC saying, like, the audience is stupid and we're just giving everybody whatever talking points Kamala Harris is making, and our goal is to make sure that we're her mouthpiece. And this is like the mainstream media channel that, if you ask people where they get their news from and they're liberals, they're like, oh, well, you don't watch MSNBC. Like, this is a place people are going to for information. And this dude, over too many glasses of wine, told somebody, like, they're not really about giving anybody real news. So it is imperative that people are willing and able to provide this information, even if maybe it is only 8,000 people that come and watch now, but Lord knows, I hope it'll be more, right? Because what you bring to the table is important, and people need to know it, right? For all my jokes on Geechee, like, he's always sending me something that I'm like, damn, where'd he find this from, right? Like, we need people who are willing to share this information. It's going to be important to break the propaganda. We're never going to get out of this as long as everybody is comfortable in their bubble.
So Jay-Z said it first, and he said it better. He dumbed down for his audience to double his dollars. That's what they did.
He was honest about it.
Yeah, and I just say to Renee, I mean, I appreciate all of what you just said. I appreciate it for sure. I mean, I do always want to clarify some of that for folks, though, in terms of like what I am and am not doing, because I think that part of the reason I do that is because people really pedestal folks that also are on these like YouTube shows or whatever. I mean, I think there was one time, Jared, where you and I were on something and somebody referred to us as like two like veteran organizers who do, and I'm like no, like don't like, I try as much as possible to bring people on the show who have great analysis, who are doing organizing, etc. But like, I don't want people to think that I'm gonna lead them or that I'm leading some other movement. If anything else, like listen to a lot of the different folks that we have on the show. And even if folks might disagree with some of the things, but like I at least try to bring people on that I think have good analyses, that are talking about important movements that other people are not talking about, and those sorts of things. So yeah, I mean, if anything, I'd say hopefully my skill is as a curator of, like, good stuff for people to hear. But
First of
yeah.
all, you're willing to do this publicly. Second of all, you do a great job of, from my vantage point, finding people that I've never heard of, which I do admit a certain ego around. That I feel like in certain political spaces, if you've been doing something, I've at least heard of you. Uh, that's again a poor measure of things, but I admit that happens. And almost every show, especially since October 7th, you've been bringing folks on here that I've never engaged with, and to my detriment. So I definitely, and then as I said before, you have a great, you're very organized and prepared. So that is, I mean, we got to shout that out as well, recognize that. I will say I was at this thing.
We should organize as well. I want to say that too, but
Yes, yes.
it's that's part of why I say it is that I actually think that's a lack, right? I would like to be more involved in organizing. So yeah.
And I know it's a separate conversation, but even how that gets defined and misdefined, and as I also think is that's why I also bristle against some of the labels. Uh, um, but I was just at an event the other day that where the purpose of the gathering was to be critical of something that I wrote as a draft, so it was appropriate. And someone acknowledged in the space, having seen me on YouTube and liking what I do, that they didn't feel comfortable criticizing what we were there to be critical of, and which deserved a lot of criticism. And I was saying, no, we need to calibrate that, because on the other hand, yes, people in the YouTube comments often go too harsh the other way. But it should never be, I can't have any appropriate criticism of somebody because I like what they do on YouTube. It's like, that's way too much. Last thing on this, I just want to acknowledge that what we're all doing, I do appreciate that there are those who appreciate what we're attempting, because there is not enough of it and so much other nonsense. So yeah, but that's it. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we need these media spaces too, for sure, with all of the wildness. And one of the things that I've appreciated is a lot of people over the last 11 months saying, like, your show is one of the places where I can go where I don't feel crazy, because like everything else can feel such a crazy place when you're under those kind of psychological warfare and the propaganda and everything else. So I'll close with this, and we'll pick this up tomorrow. But to Renee's point about Butchware and the Buying Black, so I always like put a little song with the Instagram videos, and I used Paris Escape from Babylon, which is one of my favorites. But I had to cut the clip short just a little bit, and I'll show you all why. Because he does the Panthers 10-point program in song form, but if you look at his enunciation of it, right after "Fight the Capitalists" with a raised fist,
Wow. Right.
he puts "Buy Black" and
Stack awareness.
Stack awareness, and I knew that if I included that particular lyric, that I would get a text from
The ball signal.
From
The ball signal.
that I was promoting the mythology and propaganda of Black buying
But it's
power
crazy
through.
how it's everywhere, though. It's crazy. It's just baked in everywhere. It's wild. It's wild.
Everywhere. Everywhere. And I found they just published a graphic about what this Black business boom, what it actually looks like in real numbers now that Biden's done all he can to support Black business. And it's out like that. People are looking at this and thinking like this is a boom, and not even understanding how minuscule it is in the grand scheme of things. It's wild to me. But I'm gonna say that for tomorrow. I'm gonna save it for tomorrow.
So Kai, this is a great question. I do back up the episodes that we do. I do keep backup copies of everything, both audio and video. But I think it's a huge problem. I mean, this is one of the big problems that I mean, I know you all have encountered it much more roughly than I have at Black Liberation Media.
For
But
now, yeah. Mhm.
yeah, I mean, but I just like, yeah, these spaces, they will use us to the extent that they bring them ad revenue and viewers to their platforms, but they don't like our politics, and they do all kinds of things to mess with us. And yeah, they will take us off the air too if they feel like we're really a threat. So it's a real problem, actually. And maybe that would be kind of a fun discussion to engage in another conversation of like just really talking openly about like all of the contradictions of just this platform that we're streaming on right now and engaging with it.
I
Which
think
obviously it has the audience, but
we should do a version of that. We should do a version of what we're doing with this topic, with that topic, and do it for each of our Patreons, so we can be very open and honest.
yeah, no, that would be great.
I think that would be
I'm in.
Yeah, let's do that. All right, y'all. We'll see you tomorrow. We'll continue this at 11 on Black Liberation Media tomorrow. Thanks for all of you for your time, your thoughts. This was great.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks so
and
much.
thanks everybody in the chat too. Peace,
See y'all
everybody.
tomorrow.
Sure.